Who is Parker? The ultimate anti-hero, the paragon of crime villainy, existential outsider, cold, hard, efficient, objective, amoral, focused. Parker is the heist king. If you've not read Richard Stark's Parker and Grofield books, you're in for a treat. This is Outlaw Bookseller, and today we're going to look at the world of Parker. Hello and welcome to Outlaw Bookseller. Today's video is a look at my Richard Stark collection. Richard Stark was one of the pseudonyms used by Donald E. Westlake, an American crime writer who also occasionally dabbled in science fiction and fantasy. He wrote around 100 books, used 3 pseudonyms beside his own name, Richard Stark being the most prominent, and he wrote 28 books under that name. He also wrote science fiction under the name Kurt Clark. He also wrote other crime novels under the name Tucker Coe. But Richard Stark is probably his best known pseudonym in the UK. Donald E. Westlake was, as I say, very prolific, extremely good crime writer, famous in the USA. Never been famous in the UK. He's always been a cult figure. He deserves to be far, far more famous. The Richard Stark books have always been the most popular of his works in the UK. The ones under the name Donald E. Westlake have only been sporadically published over here. What you'll notice straight away looking right in the middle of the picture is that there are 4 A format paperbacks which are published here under the name Donald E. Westlake. Now initially I believe they were published under the name Richard Stark. Now these are American paperbacks from about 20 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, and I suspect they were reissued with the Donald E. Westlake name because he was more famous under that name in the States, and most of his bestsellers, which are comic crime novels featuring a thief called Dortmunder, the most famous one was The Hot Rock, which was filmed with Robert Redford, I believe. I have seen it, but not for a long time. And probably they decided to sort of use that name because they were more saleable in the States that way. Those 4 novels are the Grofield novels, which are lighter than the Parker novels, but I'll talk about that in more depth later on. So that's my collection there of 28 books. As you'll notice straight away, the liveries and formats vary enormously. The liveries are from all sorts of different publishers, and the formats in hardcover, you'll see there are some demis on the left there from Allison and Busby. There's a Royal on the far right from Quercus of Ask the Parrot, one of the final ones, and there's a couple of octavos there from Mysterious Press. And with the paperbacks there's B formats, the odd A format. There are American trades which are slightly bigger than B format in the later ones especially. So you say to yourself, if you're a collector, wouldn't it be nice to have them in a common livery? Well, yeah, of course it would. They would look lovely. Obviously there's an outlay in terms of cash and what one can afford, and I consider myself a collector rather than a completist, and I want to talk about that in a later video. But if you do want to acquire them in the standard livery, a few years ago University of Chicago Press published all of the books in this rather handsome format. That's Plunder Squad, which was the only one I didn't have. I waited nearly 30 years for that to get issued, and I was delighted to get it, and that was the last of the initial Parker sequence I got. And I did consider getting all of them in that livery because they are quite nice, though I'm not as happy with them as I am with the earlier books. I do have a very sort of sentimental attachment to the early ones particularly, because they brought me a lot of reading pleasure, and it was great fun hanging out at second-hand bookshops trying to find them for years and years and years. I didn't buy any of these on ABE because I didn't look at ABE until 2003, because I just felt as soon as I saw ABE I knew that it would bankrupt me, so I avoided that. The later ones, because there was a huge hiatus in the publishing schedule, because Stark stopped writing about Parker in the early 70s and came back to him then right at the very end of the 90s and resumed his criminal career. So they were great to buy new. I bought a lot of those new from places like Murder One in London, and some of them I imported into my own bookshops I was working at that point. Murder One, of course, was run by Maxim Jakubowski, who I mentioned a couple of times, co-collaborator on Deep Ends, really nice guy, great crime writer, publisher, anthologist. So it was always a joy to visit Murder One and to pick those up in person. But as you see, lots of different formats. So it's more about, for me, having all the books, because I love them all, because they are one of my comfort reads as well. I could easily put this in my comfort read sort of zone. So there they are, a lot of them, and then we'll break off now and we look at them individually, and hope you enjoy this. So this is the first Parker novel, Point Blank, originally published as The Hunter. It's also been published as Payback. Both of those VTs, variant titles, are due to film versions. Even though The Hunter was published in the early 60s, by the late 60s it had been filmed by John Borman as Point Blank, with Lee Marvin as Parker, who was renamed Walker for reasons which remain obscure in the film, and Angie Dickinson as his wife. Although the film is very good, it isn't a patch on the novel. It's an excellent film, in fact, and I will talk about it at another point when I do a Parker on film thread. But the main problem with I think there's 6 Parker films out there, is that they don't have fealty to the plots, and clearly the casting of the main character and the understanding of the character doesn't really come through, and I think this is a problem with filmmakers. They often pursue their vision when often the writer is superior as a writer and an artist. So that's a particular bugbear of mine. I'll talk about that another time. So if you go in search of Parker films, do expect disappointment. The only ones really worth watching are Point Blank and the alternate version, Payback, with Mel Gibson, which isn't bad, but doesn't, again, quite nail it. But it's a beautiful film to look at. Both are beautiful films to look at. So the plot of Point Blank, The Hunter, sets things up. It's a setup book. It's rather like The Talented Mr. Ripley, that you get a great insight into the character, and it's a great novel, but you don't get the full thing. It doesn't really get going until 2 or 3 books in. So it's just an introductory work to get used to the character. And the thing about Parker is that he has motivations which are not conventional, and which is why he's a successful thief. And you see time and again in the books, he sets up heists and they go wrong because of the actions of other people or due to contingency and chance. So there's a lot of that element in it, so it doesn't always come off, sometimes it does. In this one, he forges a friendship with a questionable person who's been working for the mob, and needs to recover money to get back into the mob after they make a mistake. And this person forges a relationship with Parker's wife, Lynn, and they then betray him, double-cross him, shoot him, and leave him for dead in the course of a heist. So that sets up a conventional revenge motif, but with Parker it's always about the money, and even though he settles scores, it is about the cash, and he goes in search of the cash, and that leads him to the top of the mob. So he goes up against the mob, an only man, but he's single-minded, efficient and cool, and that's how we see things starting off. We then move on into the second novel, The Man with the Getaway Face, and as you see, these are both Allison and Busby. I'm not sure how many of the books Allison and Busby published in hardcover. I don't think they did them all. They seem to do them all in paperback, even though some of them I've never seen and not managed to track down. So perhaps if I ever do go for a uniform set, I'll try and get the Allison and Busby paperbacks that I don't have, if they're out there. I must do some research. Really, it was all about just getting them in the first place, which was hard enough for the days of the internet. And then, of course, when that came along, I had other fish to fry with collecting and sort of moved on to other things because, of course, one's budget is limited. So The Man with the Getaway Face is showing Parker at the next stage after he's got his money back from the mob and his wife and his ex-friend out of the way, shall we say, and he decides to have plastic surgery because he needs to sort of evade the vengeance of the mob and also the police, because he spent some time in prison for vagrancy before the beginning of Point Blank. So it doesn't go that smoothly. There are some issues, but the career criminal doesn't mind changing his face just to get away with things. So this is quite an interesting one. It gives you an insight into Parker's mindset of he's a man who's willing to do anything to pursue his goal. He doesn't really care what he looks like, as long as he can manage to undertake his job, his profession as a master heist organizer. That's all he cares about. So this is a really interesting psychological insight, as well as him physically changing. And it creates some issues because, of course, as the books go later on, a lot of people who knew Parker in the past don't recognize him. So there's a trust issue there that he has to deal with. As with all good ongoing commercial crime series, we need to have a few routine novels to further establish the character, the motivations, the modus operandi, and so on. So what Stark did next with these books, these are the third, fourth and fifth novels in the series, is work on establishing Parker at work in his normal day-to-day run of things, which is spending time at luxury hotels with whatever woman he can pick up, sitting there sipping his drink, having a bit of shenanigans in the evening, generally luxuriating in the good life, and then after a few months having to rebuild his stash of cash, going out and doing a job. So these are three routine cases, as it were, and of course you'll see how these are crime oriented. They're true crime novels. They're not detective novels, police procedurals. They are about theft. And this is what's interesting, because most crime novels are about murder. Now occasionally in the world of Parker, people do get, shall we say, shuffled off this mortal coil without their willingness. And it's never something that Parker seeks to do. It's something that he will only do. He will only kill if it's necessary for him to get away with the money. He's generally trustworthy. He relies on a network of other career criminals based around the USA. He doesn't work with the same people all the time because they live in different cities, the jobs in different cities. But more often than not, somebody will come to Parker. He will set the heist up. He's the master planner. He will take part in it, and with a handful of other trusted people. And as I say, because he has issues regarding his appearance, which has changed, it takes him a while to sort of get those people back on his side. And what's interesting is you'll see some wonderful character drawing from Richard Stark, where different villains pop up, they disappear, sometimes they try and double cross or betray their partners in crime. There is no honour amongst thieves, as we'll see, though there is amongst some of them, and you get used to these people coming back and forth. So there's great opportunities for a novelist to do this, to have these sort of featured characters in an ensemble cast. Not the same characters, so we never get bored with them, but they're drawn so well and so specifically in Stark's stripped down minimalist style that we feel we know them and we can see them, and we get to like them, we get to dislike some of them. And the funny thing about these books, as I've said, is that Parker is strangely sympathetic. You get rather fed up with some of the goons he has to work with sometimes. Sometimes people come on board with ideas and they're insiders, there's the right place, the right time, what have you. So there is a puzzle element sometimes about how the thieves will get into a jam and how they get out of it. It doesn't always go smoothly. Some of the cover quotes on his Alison Busby editions are great. A repulsive character. I mean, I really like Parker. I think it's that thing that in your moments where you just cannot suffer fools anymore, Parker comes to mind. And also, this is a great quotation, a true existential. And that is the thing, it's Parker's world is dark and cold and harsh, and the only thing that matters is money and pleasure. And he goes after it single-mindedly, and it's very, very refreshingly interesting. So if you imagine somebody like Camus or Sartre, Richard Stark is kind of the Camus of crime fiction. Existentialism is a big thing in American crime fiction, and the French existentialists were very keen on American crime writers, and this is it in its purest form. So those are some routine cases to get the series established, and now we'll move on to the next ones. I should mention that the score was also published under the title Kill Town. I think that's the original paperback. This one's got a rather nasty leaning spine, so I really hate leaning spines. It's one of my sort of pet peeves, so at some point I must try and replace that, but that was the only copy I could find of that book. So that's the fifth Parker novel. So moving on, we have some more routine cases. The Jugger. A Jugger is a safe cracker, and one of Parker's regular friends is Joe Shear. He appears in some of the books, and he was a contact man, and it's all about finding a new safe cracker to help do a safe cracking job. You'll see most of these are Alison and Busby. Some of them I bought new because they were still in print. Some were out of print by the time I got into Parker. In the middle here we've got a Fawcett Gold Medal edition of The Split. Now this was originally entitled The Seventh, and it was the 7th Parker thriller. So there we go. So that's an interesting. It would be nice to have them all in these lovely American A formats. Maybe one day, if I ever get the cash and the time, I'll sort that out. And The Handle, another routine case, as it were. None of them are routine really. They're all different, and that's the beauty of them. But across these books, you do get the feeling that Stark is just building up the Parker brand. We're going to know the characters. We're seeing different situations. We're marveling at the different sort of jobs that he and his teams pull off or not. And you get the odd double cross and things. And they're really just great entertainment. I can't speak highly enough of them. But by this point, at the end of these novels, Parker is long established. We've read 7 books. We've had the 2 introductory ones that have set him up. And we're seeing his MO really evolving. We're seeing his successes and his failures. And they're just great entertainment. So that's that tranche, and then things start to sort of change a little bit with the next lot. As the Parker books approach and go into double figures, we see a score sequence where Stark examines different types of heist jobs through Parker's eyes, and we see some evolution of the character. One of my favourites, I think it was on the first ones I read, was the Rare Coin Score. And as you see, I've got 2 editions here. I've got this paperback, which I bought new from a shop I was working in, and this one I think I got in Hay on Y. So there you go. And the Rare Coin Score is a great one. And this is a super story about a job at a coin show, numismatics, where there are coin collectors, and there's an insider who wants to rob a load of coins. He wants something specific, and he has a female partner, and he's a bit of a butterball, as they would say, and there's some sort of chemistry between Parker and the inside guy's partner, and it sort of goes on from there. So we start to see another side as Parker begins to get involved with a woman on a regular basis again, and maybe develop some trust. So that's a great one. Green Eagle Score is, as it says on the cover, robbing a US Air Force of his entire payroll. So it's another caper. Then the Black Ice Score, which is about stealing diamonds from Africa. And these are, again, great entertainment. The Rare Coin Score is a real sort of favourite of mine, as I say, because it introduces Claire, who becomes Parker's paramour for quite a while. And it's really interesting because the world of coin collecting is fascinating stuff, because of course being a book collector you can relate to other sort of collecting, and it's really interesting. So that's a really fantastic one. So that's the sort of score sequence, and then things move into an even higher gear. We're now into the real mature part of the sequence, and these are 3 of my favourite Parker novels, and they seem to be getting more tense and more terse and more dangerous as time goes on. The scores are not always so easy. They're not always so capery in feeling. They're starting to be a bit more literary, but at the same time even more existential. And these really are, for me, amongst the high points of the entire sequence. The Sour Lemon Score is about a score that goes wrong. Deadly Edge shows Parker becoming more attached to Claire and showing more of a human side when she is kidnapped. And as it says in the cover, the most amoral of literary series. And that's the beauty of these. You really do get to relate to Parker and some of the other characters who are the good guys, as it were, as opposed to the backstabbing types. And it's strange because, of course, they're not nice people. You know, these are bad men, but you do feel a kind of kinship with them because they're anti-heroes. You have to identify with somebody in fiction, obviously. And the idea that everybody has to be sympathetic is very strange. For me, what they have to be is a character you can recognise either from real life or you can imagine. And of course Park's an imagined character. The beauty of these is that you do think to yourself, maybe there are people out there who have been habitual criminals who have never been caught, especially in these days, you know, when these were written before the internet, the 60s, early 70s, when it was a lot tougher, when forensics wasn't developed. and people could get away with things. There probably were some successful people if they were efficient and cool and objective based and focused as Parker is, and that's his attraction. We really get off on that because he doesn't just, you know, blow up and do silly things. He's a man who's in control, and we admire that. So for me, this sequence culminates in Slayground, which is a work of kinetic brilliance. It's almost like reading a screen treatment. It begins with a wonderful sequence of an armored car robbery, which goes pear-shaped, and the crew attacking the armored car include Parker and his friend Grofield. I'm going to talk about Grofield a bit more in a moment. Grofield's a very sort of light, sunny sort of thief. He spends a lot of time working as an actor. He runs his own little playhouse, does avant-garde things in the, you know, in some state where there's no other theatre, and that's his passion. That's what he loves, and he's a thief just so he can fund that, so he can fund his art. So he's a really sort of fun character. He's a light-hearted. He's always kidding Parker. Parker sort of gives him a cold shoulder, but you can tell there's a kind of kinship between the men because Grofield is efficient, fast, and he's a good thief. So they really get on. This reliability is the key in Parker's world. So Grofield's in this one as well. So the novel begins, as I say, with a fantastic heist sequence which goes wrong, and Grofield is knocked unconscious, and Parker has to take refuge over a fence, and over this fence is a closed amusement park, a fairground, hence Slayground, and he hides out in there where he's pursued by some bent cops who've witnessed the crime from a distance, and they want to get their hands on the money. So what we see then is Parker using the fairground in the middle of winter. He's trying to survive through the night and using the fairground to defeat his adversaries who are bent on getting the money from him. And as I say, it's like reading a screen treatment. It's incredible, sort of kinetic action. It's in the all physical. There's very little dialogue. It's description of what he does. And you can see it on screen. And there is a film of Slayground, and it's unbelievably terrible. It has a very fine actor in it, Peter Coyote, which is a shame because he would have made quite a good Parker. And there's all these elements which are not in the novel introduced for no reason whatsoever. The film was made in the 80s, and it's an absolute mess. It's a real shame because if somebody filmed Slayground the way it was written, you would have one of the best crime films ever. So I think that Michael Mann could do, and I think Michael Mann is massively influenced by Richard Stark personally. You watch a film like Heat, and the character Neil, played by Robert De Niro, is very, very much a Parker type character. He's sort of cold, efficient, hard, professional, very much in that ballpark. So Heat is a good benchmark, give you an idea what these are like, except these are more stripped down, and Parker is purer and less emotive. So Slayground, one of my favourite books. I put that in my book, 100 Must-Read Books for Men. And if you ever just read one Parker book, read that one. But you are best to read more, just to get the characters, you understand the anti-motivation of the man himself. So that's a really great part of the Matua sequence. After Slayground, things take an interesting turn as the Parker sequence branches off into another short sequence of books written under the Richard Stark byline, and these are the Grofield novels. These are A-format paperbacks I purchased sort of late 90s, early 2000s, I think mostly from Murder One in London. I think I got them all from Murder One actually. I don't think I got them all at the same time, and they were published by Foul Play Press. What a great name for a publisher. And they've got these rather attractive little cover designs. I do like these. They're not like any other books I own. They really look unique. And these are about Grofield, the actor thief, friend of Parker's. And the fascinating thing about the Blackbird particularly, which is my favourite of these, is that the first chapter of the Blackbird and the first chapter of Slayground are identical apart from small grammatical changes for point of view. The first chapter of Slayground depicts things more from Parker's point of view, whereas the first chapter of the Blackbird depicts them from Grofield's point of view. So we see the same heist with the armoured car, we see things going wrong. The wording is almost identical. It's really disconcerting, really interesting. It's the sort of thing that a writer like Christopher Priest or Philip K. Dick would do. Not something you see much in crime writing. It's a common sort of thing in really good SF, especially SF for the literary quality. So that's really interesting. And Grofield is knocked out and he wakes up, and there's a caper that goes on from there. His capers are often international. They often involve women, the blackbird, the damsel, the dame. And, you know, he's quite a charmer, and he gets into all sorts of scrapes, and they're great fun. And they've got a more international feeling about them than most of the Parker novels, and they're really, really great fun. So if you, I don't think they've ever been in print in the UK. I've never seen UK editions of them. Certainly not in my time, and I've never come across them. These are the only copies I've ever seen, the ones I have. And Lemons Never Lie, this is a great one as well. And it starts when an LA airport slot machine turns up 3 lemons. He knows that his luck is going to turn, and you know, it's sort of tongue-in-cheek. And these are interesting because what Donald E. Westlake said was that he wrote Parker novels on gloomy days when he was in a bad mood, and he wrote his Donald E. Westlake crime sort of caper funny novels when he was in a good mood. And these are sort of in between, because you get the stripped down quality and the sort of same sort of elements that you get in the Parker novels, but with a different protagonist, with protagonists we know. And they're really great fun, but I do consider them part of the sequence, because Parker's relationship with Grofield is really, really important. And one of the books, I think it's one of the later ones, I believe is Butcher's Moon. It's a while since I've read them in sequence, so I do need to do that again. Parker would never go back to rescue anybody. And this is a spoiler, so you might want to turn this down. So I'll give you a chance to do that. So yeah, so in one of the last Parker books, before the series stopped for a good while, Parker goes back to rescue Grofield when something's gone wrong after a heist. Now normally he would never do this because it's not efficient, and the code of the professional thief is that, you know, you've got to get away with the money. If somebody is stuck, that's probably due to their own inefficiency. If they're a good thief, they'll understand, they'll get the payoff, they'll get their part later on, as long as there's trust there. And of course there's lots of double crossings and backstabbing, as I say. So that's a really interesting indicator that Parker's character is starting to soften. And, you know, it was an unexpected thing. And Westlake does these things very rarely. You just need one every few books. And it's a similar thing is done by Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough in her series about Saint Germain, the vampire. You know, you get these formula books, which are really well written. The formula's not like anybody else's. And then you get a little sidestep that you're not expecting, and it has much bigger impact because you've been waiting for it and because it hasn't been there, and it rounds out the characters and the scenario. So it's really interesting. So if you ever see these, pick them up, because they really are really hard to find. In the early 70s, these two books closed off the Parker sequence. Stark had taken a break for a while from Parker, and he'd written the Grofield books, so there was 2 or 3 years where he didn't do any Parker books, and then he finished off with these two, Plunder Squad and Butcher's Moon. And these are the hardest to get. I remember me and my friend Nick trying to get these for years, and it was just a real sort of, you know, one of those things where you just looked and looked and looked, and one day I just came across Butcher's Moon, and that was a great relief. This is published by Coronet, NEL. It's got a bit of a bendy spine, which I really don't like. That's another pet peeve of mine, the broken spine. This is a sort of book I'd only buy in this condition because I desperately needed a reading copy. So, you know, I am watching out for a nicer one. So those are the last two, and they were brutal, complex, great titles: Plunder Squad, Butcher's Moon, and back to the sort of heist thing, and, you know, the characters are broader. And it's the early 70s, so we're just starting to see some cultural changes. So those finished off the sequence, and I think at that time Westlake was getting more and more success with his Dortmunder novels, humorous novels about another thief. The Hot Rock was the famous one. I'd say that was filmed with Robert Redford, and there were other ones, and they really seemed to strike a chord with the American public. So he just sort of seemed to drop Parker, which was a shame. So that was about 72, and then there was a long hiatus before Parker made a triumphant return. So in 1997, after a 25-year absence, Parker made a triumphant return with Comeback, and these are Mysterious Press editions. I think I got these from Murder One. I might have managed to get 1 or 2 of them wherever I was working at the time. And Mysterious Press was Great American Crime imprint. It was briefly a UK imprint under the aegis of Century Hutchinson Arrow at one point. I believe Otto Penzler is the man who started Mysterious Press. I'm not as much a crime expert as I'm an SF one, but it's a name that looms large. And it was great to see Parker back. And of course, in that time, you know, CCTV, forensics had all come up. So we saw Parker dealing with a new sort of harder edged world where it was tougher to get away with heists. And these are these great matchbook designs, which are lovely. And you see there's a paperback, a hardcover and a paperback. And of course, in those days, not all of us had the internet, and it was harder to keep on top of what was coming out, especially in the USA, because these books were not distributed and published in the UK. So I just had to get whatever I could, and sometimes by the time the awareness was there, the books were already out in paperback, hence a paperback from back, a hardcover first of Backflash. That's the first true first edition hardcover I have of any of the books. And then Flashfire. You notice the titles, Come Back, Backflash, Flash Fire. Very clever way of linking them together, and these are just simply just great heist novels. And it was wonderful to see Parker back on form and kicking backside in his traditional way, albeit with the contemporary adjustments to the way that crime and detection had moved on. And into the 21st century we went with Parker, with some more heists, some more capers, some more backstabbing, some more good bad guys, some more bad good guys, and so on. And we had Firebreak, the sequel to Flashfire. The theme link in the words is they again Firebreak to break out. And that came to a close with Nobody Runs Forever. And I see we've got a Mysterious Press first here, and a Mysterious Press first there, and Mysterious Press trade there, which you see is larger than the hardcovers in the edition. So there you go. As you see, the covers change. They sort of reset them, rebalanced them, remarketed them, repackaged them, and this is why you often can't get a consistent run across an entire series unless you get the Chicago ones. And there's so many series customers in the bookshops I've worked in for decades have said to me, why can't I get these books in the same format, the same covers, what have you? And it is frustrating. And it's interesting when you think about it, because if you think of record collecting, the livery and designs of album covers doesn't change, and they acquire a period feel and a patina and a classic look all of their own. But they do with books. For some reason we have to feel that books have to be changed all the time to appeal to a contemporary market, and there's too much focus on the contemporary in the world of books. It's not always about what's new. It should be more about what's up that's already good that people have missed. We seem fixated on the new, in the book trade, and I don't think that's always right, but that's just a personal opinion. So there you go, we're into the 21st century, Parker, and coming up to the finish line. So by the time those Mysterious Press books had come out in the States, they started to appear from Quercus in the UK, great little publisher, and Quercus. These are the two Quercus editions I've got, the last two Parker books, Ask the Parrot and Dirty Money. And these see Parker in desperate straits. His wanted posters everywhere, he's trying to get away. They're quite closely linked, and you are seeing the net of modern detection starting to close on the great man. So they're quite tough calls for Parker. And again, you see different editions. I didn't manage to get Dirty Money in hardcover. I don't know how I missed that. I think there's a lot going on in my life at the time. I think I may have been busy writing, because when that came out I was writing a couple of books for Alice A&C Black, so I kind of missed that. And there you go. So these weren't meant to be the last Parker books, I'm sure. It's just that Westlake died shortly after Dirty Money was published, so it just happened to be the last Parker books that we had, not the last ones he intended to write. So that's the very end of the sequence. As I say, 28 books if you include the Grofield novels. Looking inside one of these Mysterious Press editions in the last tranche I showed you, it suggests a different running order for the Grofield novels to what I have, and it suggests they're in different places in the chronology. Having said that, it does put the Blackbird before Slayground, when of course it's contiguous, and I'm sure from my reading of them that the sequence I cite is the correct one in terms of internal chronology for the Grofield novels. And so that's something I need to look at in more depth. I'm pretty sure I'm right on this one. If there's any hardcore Stark fans out there who want to give me some more evidence, I'd be happy to have it. So that's the Parker novels of Richard Stark. Different sizes, shapes, formats, what have you. So not essentially a unified collection, but that doesn't really matter, because what matters is the text inside the books themselves. And I have to say, these are probably my favourite crime series of all time. I just Absolutely love them. Despite the fact that they have their formula, it's a different formula. Every single one was a joy to read. I probably could have read another 25. I wouldn't have missed any of them for the world. So if you want to get into a series and really enjoy it, I mean, I always recommend these to people who like Lee Child, but you know, I think Jack Reacher, all very well and good, but you know, the toughest, the coldest, the hardest, the ultimate anti-hero, the ultimate master thief is Parker. So don't miss these, because they are really important books in the annals of crime fiction. Even people like Peter Lovesey, who writes gentle sort of funny sort of crime novels set in Bath, has said to me many times how much he loves Stark. So he's an absolute master. So Donald E. Westlake, Richard Stark. There will be another clip I'm going to do about his other work, especially his work in science fiction and his other crime novels. So this is Outlaw Bookseller signing off for now.